Wrapping up an MMA weekend, Kevin Iole, our lead MMA writer, is here with us. Dan Henderson wins another title. Kevin, pretty impressive. I don't know how good Fei Zhao is, but the way he did it was impressive.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dan Henderson's one of the top fighters in the world. I don't think there's any question about that. Is he a top 10 fighter anymore? No, I don't think he is. I don't think anybody rational would argue that, but he's an entertaining fighter. He's a guy that is going to beat most people he fights in his weight class. He's going to beat most of the 205ers, most of the 185ers. I think maybe his days as a 185er are done. But he's Dan is a truly one of the best fighters of all time, and I think he did what Dan Henderson does, and he went out there last night and put on the kind of performance I expected from him. I would have been disappointed in Dan if he had struggled with Fei Zhao. Frankly, I think Dan's a better fighter, better overall fighter, top to bottom. I would have been disappointed to see anything less than Dan really getting a solid victory.
It was a weird knockout. Across nails him on the chin, and I almost thought he knocked him more when the way he hit the canvas. Man, he freaking slammed his head, and then he got in like four shots from behind. And I mean that's the other thing that you like about Dan Henderson. There are guys who, when someone's hurt, maybe they hesitate a little bit. He has a killer instinct.
He is a finisher. We saw it with the Michael Bisping fight. We've seen it with so many of his fights. The Babalu fight last time out. He gets you down and hurt a little bit. He doesn't give you a chance to regain your bearings. I mean, he gets on there and he finishes. And referees have to know, when Dan Henderson's fighting, they got to be ready to get in there because he is going to pounce and he's going to start firing away and with reckless abandon. I mean, that's something that I think some young fighters can really learn from. You have to understand when that opening is there, and he has a good sense of when it is and when it's there and when to go. And he took care of business last night, as we've seen him do throughout his wonderful career.
One thought I had as I was watching was, man, it was just a little while ago that Jake Shields kind of locked horns with him at a lower weight, and strength-wise was not overwhelmed. Also took that big punch on the chin and survived. Maybe moves up Shields, in my mind, a notch with his chance. I probably think he has more of a chance to beat GSP than most people, but I think Shields is for real. I mean, that was impressive from Hendo against a guy, strength-wise, who's 225 pounds.
The thing that was impressive for Jake, and when you look back, is Dan was a great wrestler, an Olympic wrestler, and to basically out wrestle a wrestler. I mean, that was phenomenal. I think part of it, Dan is at the stage. Dan likes to talk about he's a small 205. He doesn't he doesn't have any problems making the weight. 185 is easy for him to make. I think at 40 plus years old now, his 185 days are probably behind him unless there's a huge big money fight. I just don't think he can be as good at that weight. It causes him a little bit of a problem at 205 against the top 205ers because you're talking about guys that are considerably bigger than he is. He's not cutting much to get to the 205-pound limit, where you've got guys, Anderson Silva's 230 between fights. So I think there's a little bit of a problem there, but I think Dan's right now at this point. I don't think his body can really get effectively to 185. He can make it, but he's not the same guy at 185 that he is at 205.
So what do you think is next at 205 in Strikeforce for Henderson?
Well, I think if Mousasi wins his fight on April 9th, I think that might be the way they go. There's some people that are calling to see him fight Fedor. See Fedor drop down from heavyweight to go fight him at 205. I don't expect that to happen, Steve, for a number of reasons. Number one, Fedor has been fighting at heavyweight for a long time, and even though he's really not a different size, say, than Anderson Silva, these guys are used to cutting the weight. Fedor is not. And I think it'd be a very difficult thing to ask him to cut 30, 35 pounds at this stage of his career when he's never really done it. It would be an entertaining fight if you saw Dan fight Fedor. I think that would be a really a fun fight and would be something to look forward to. But you know what? I don't get too caught up in the title either. Why not do a catchweight fight? I mean, they can fight and say, hey, Dan will fight him at 220. I think that's Dan doesn't have to be the same weight, and he's fought bigger guys before, and I think Fedor could cut a few. I mean, he was a little soft around the middle the last couple times out, as he usually is. So I think there's some weight that he could drop, and that way he's going to cut some, but he's not going to have to drain himself to get down to 205 pounds, and that would be a very very entertaining fight.
Put your promoter hat on. What fight do you make? Mousasi and Henderson or Fedor and Henderson?
You know, I think that they're really committed to Fedor, trying to find a way to get Fedor back into the mix in the heavyweight division. So I think Mousasi is the way to go. It's a good young fighter that they have that kind of got sidestepped, and I think still has a lot of ability, a lot of potential. We shouldn't overlook him, and so I think that that's a good one because that would be a good. He's a good striker, got a lot of interesting things about him. I think it create an interesting matchup with Dan. Obviously is a good striker with a lot of power, a different type of striker, I think, than Mousasi. Dan's wrestling, maybe neutralize some of the kicks. I think it would be a fascinating fight on a number of levels. So to me, that's the way to go. If Mousasi wins on April 9th when he fights in San Diego, that's the way we go.
What do you think is next for Fedor? When are we going to see him again? I mean, that's going to be the goal, is to push him back into the heavyweight tournament, or do they book him a fight and say the heck with it, he's not getting back in?
I think they really want to get him in the tournament, and the fact that now they have a delay, that they're not doing it, makes it a little bit easier. Lets him recover from his injuries, lets him start, kind of regrouping and healing. But I think before we think of anything about what's next for Fedor's got to think about what's next for Fedor, and he really has to. Immediately after the fight, he made the point. I'm not sure I want to fight again, if the translation was correct. And we don't know that. But later he kind of, retracted and backtracked on that. So, if he decides he wants to fight again and is fully committed, then I think we'll see him fight a significant heavyweight fight. I don't think they're going to put him in there, with a second-rate heavyweight. I think, he's going to be in there with the top guy. I would guess, Steve, that they would put him in with somebody, not a super heavyweight, but somebody in the 230, 240 range as opposed to the 265 range, who's then going to go off the charts when he rehydrates, and like Bigfoot Silva did, and come in at 285.
Would you roll the dice and put him in with a young guy like Del Rosario or Cormier?
I think those would be interesting fights. It would help make one of those guys a star if they were to come in and beat Fedor. It would help give them some notoriety. But by the same token, if you're Scott Coker, and do you want to sit there and do you want to risk a guy? I think let's take Cormier. I think Cormier is a really fascinating guy, but I think he's got a lot of development to go. Some people move faster than others, and while I think Daniel's getting better, I'm still not sure that he's ready even for a diminished Fedor. Maybe at the end of this year he would be, but we're talking Fedor's next fight probably going to be in the summer sometime. I'm not sure. Del Rosario, I think, is actually a pretty good fighter. I really like what I saw of him. And I'm not so sure that the people at M1, want to be hearing too much conversation about him.
All right, Kev. Nice job.
Thank you, Steve.